Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. AP Human Geography, Dustin Fowler. Look at this, it's time for the Unit 1 test. Now, most of what I'm doing is based off of maybe several different sources. I'm using the Rubenstein book, but we've also looked at all sorts of materials from all sorts of other sources, and we've come up with basically 3 different categories of things that we need to know about the test. And so, the purpose of this video is to prepare you guys for the Unit 1 test. This video is way more updated from the ones that you will have seen early on, like the 2013 and 14 version of my test review. I think is the latest one I've got. And so if you're here, you're in the right place. Let's talk about some of the things you need to know. First of all, this is tell me what you know about each of the terms. You want to be as thorough as possible so that you know everything that might be on the test. Now this test here is specifically the one that I'm giving my students. They're all basically the same. I mean, everyone's teaching the same stuff. We're basing it on the course description from the AP Human Geography guide course description on the College Central website. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and begin. So, who are the dudes you need to know for this test? Make sure you guys can see that. Dudes you need to know. Basically, we spent some time looking at some of these early historical geographers, and we started with some of the Greek guys. And so, this might not be everyone there is to know, but these are certainly the ones we talked about in class and the ones that I expect my students to know on the test, and hopefully anybody else out there. If you didn't know who these guys were, you'll know by the time this is all said and done. One more thing I want to point out to all of you is that I'm going to include a PDF file in the description for this video. That's going to, you guys click on the link and it will bring a description to this document so that you can click on some of the links I'm going to put in here and find out a little bit of basic information about some of these concepts. Not all of them. We've talked about these things in class a lot. It may be beneficial if you're a write it down kind of learner. You might want to write down some notes on this stuff while I'm going through it. So whatever works for you so you can get the most out of the video. It's probably going to be a long one, so brace yourself and get ready. Let's go. Aristotle. First of all, this guy was one of the Greek philosophers. Now, he was the tutor of Alexander the Great. He was a smart guy. He understood his geography, among other things. The guy had learned from Plato, who learned from Socrates. So we're talking, this guy was one of the real backbones of Western philosophy based on the Greek model. One of the dudes that nobody questioned through all of the Middle Ages and all the way up into the Renaissance. That's when he started to get questioned a little bit. He was the first person to ever consider that the Earth might actually be a sphere, right? And so people had, for a long time they had observed stars and the moon and all that, and they knew that things in space were a sphere. They weren't really sure about the placement of Earth and all of that. Many people kind of thought that, with Ptolemy here, which we're going to talk about in a moment, many people thought that the Earth might be in the center of everything, Eratosthenes was also a Greek dude who lived during the Hellenistic time period. He was an individual that proved the circumference of the Earth. He was able to calculate it with striking accuracy. I'm not a mathematician. I'm certainly not as smart as this guy. If he was able to use geometry and things like that to figure out the circumference of the Earth, but that's exactly what he did. Ptolemy was actually a map maker. This guy here came up with the idea of the Earth being in the center of everything. So he comes up with this geocentric theory, the Ptolemaic theory, if you will, and believed it was actually kind of set in stone. I mean, no one questioned these old thinkers about these things. It's kind of considered to be the norm, considered to be the way it was, that the Earth was at the center of everything. Which also kind of made sense from a Christian standpoint, even though it's not biblical at all. Most Christians during the Middle Ages and even well into the Renaissance believed that if God makes human beings the most important of all creation, that we are in the center and that everything else is above would be the heavens or heaven and below would be hell. Which also makes sense when you think about like volcanoes and stuff shooting up all that sulfur and brimstone and fire and all that good stuff. Something else you gotta think about, and I'm not gonna go too much detail about this, but the geocentric theory made sense to everybody. I mean, after all, they didn't know what gravity was yet, and so if you're slinging a jump rope over your head, the only thing keeping that jump rope down is your hand holding it. Well, since they don't realize that gravity would be the same as their hand, they would think, well, if the Earth was spinning, which it would have to be spinning if we were not in the center of everything, then, well, we'd fly off the Earth, wouldn't we? Copernicus was my first boy to say, hey, no, we probably wouldn't fall off the Earth. He accepted what is called the heliocentric theory, or the idea that the Earth is not in the center. He may have based those thoughts about the Earth not being in the center of the universe off of maybe a little bit of math. There was also a fellow named Johannes Kepler who used this math to calculate the elliptical orbits of the various planets in the sky, and it made more sense to, in terms of where they would be placed in the sky if they were orbiting using ellipses. Galileo, however, kind of sealed the deal on Copernicus's theory by saying, hey, you know what? I just saw, using my telescope that I modified the bejeezus out of it, I saw where Copernicus' theory has come true on Jupiter. Because why? You've got different moons circling Jupiter. Now, one of the biggest arguments against the heliocentric theory was that there's no way that the moon could circle the Earth while the Earth is circling the sun. This doesn't make sense. Oh my gosh. Well, Galileo here was the first one to notice that, in fact, hey, that is the case, because I'm seeing it happen around Jupiter. So that proves that it could happen around Earth. As far as he was concerned, this was irrefutable. He knew that Copernicus was right. The heliocentric theory was the way it was. Unfortunately for my boy Galileo, the Inquisition gets a hold of him to make him recant or take back everything he ever said. They put him in house arrest where he's going to die an old man. Roughly the same year that Isaac Newton was born. Muhammad al-Idrisi, which I'm sure I probably just mispronounced this fellow here was a Arabic geographer, and one of the things that he does is he I just moved up too much. One of the things that al-Idrisi does is he comes up with an atlas. He creates an atlas of the Earth and of basically the known world. And this was going on during like the height of these Islamic empires. So while Europe plummeted into death, despair, gnashing of teeth, and the Dark Ages, nothing smart was going on in Europe. This fellow here was actually learning and picking up where the Greeks had left off. He was creating these maps. He was demonstrating the known world and helping people to stay literate in geography in the Middle East. Gerardus Mercator, again probably mispronouncing the first name. I know I got the second name right though. Comes up with the Mercator projection. Now, we're about to talk about what projections are, so I'm not going to do this here. But what Mercator does is he comes up with this map that's used for navigation. During the time of the age of exploration, when navigating maps were pretty important if you were trying to get from Europe to the Americas. He also was the creator of an atlas. I didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about that in class, but he was all-around map dude. You just spent a lot of time looking at him. Carl Sauer. This fellow here is very, very important for the subject of human geography. Anyone taking the class has surely heard of this guy. So, who is he? What did he do? Well, Carl Sauer is a more contemporary geographer who was spent most of his time talking about how the most important thing in all of human geography, the most important things geographers are going to do has to do with the cultural landscape. In other words, looking at how people have modified or interacted with and have left their cultural imprint upon the land. Many would argue that there's no such thing as just a untapped, completely pure physical landscape. Every element of the earth at all has in some capacity been impacted by human activity. Carl Sauer was the mastermind behind this notion, and you need to know him. He's the big guy about the cultural landscape, and in fact, Rubinstein calls his book The Cultural Landscape. So it kind of makes sense. Make sure you know who these dudes are. Cool, so looking on the next segment here. Philosophies, ideas, and phenomena you need to know for human geography. Now, geography in and of itself is such a hugely broad subject of study. It includes elements of all social studies, economics, politics, sociology, psychology, all of these different things are going to include themselves within the discipline of geography. And so what people do is they try to make it a little bit more easy to understand by organizing the discipline into themes or traditions, as you see here with the 5 themes and passions for traditions. We did an assignment about these, comparing and contrasting the two in class, and you need to make sure that you know and can even identify photographs that demonstrate each of the 5 themes of geography. So let's just recap them real quick. I have a video in my YouTube channel where I spend time talking exclusively about the 5 themes of geography, and so feel free to go back and look at that if you have any questions about it that I don't cover right here. But you've got movement, region, human environment, interaction, location, and place. Now I set it up in such a way because if you set it up like this, then the acronym here, you're going to see the Mr. Help acronym. Alright, which is very, very important for helping you to more easily understand or remember the 5 themes of geography. Mr. Help. So movement is how people, goods, and ideas get from one place to another. They use airplanes, trains, cars, or the internet, for example. Any of these things are possible ways for us to move stuff across space. Region is a comparative type thing. So what you're going to do is you're going to take characteristics of one location and compare it with the characteristics of another. These characteristics, by the way, can be physical, but they can also be cultural. Human environment interaction is how we get along with the environment around us and how every single day we may make decisions based off of what the world is doing. For example, if it's hot outside, we're going to dress in shorts and t-shirts. If it's raining, we're going to bring an umbrella. If we live in the southeast during hurricane season, we're going to be ready to expect some hurricanes. And it's just part of what we do. Location, and there's other things also with human environment interaction. For example, we're going to be talking about site and situation in just a moment, but these are 2 elements of how we interact with our environment as well, because we locate things based on other locations, and we have the ability to change the characteristics of the land around us. And so we interact all the time with our environment. Every single time we build a road or build a city or build a school, these are all different things that we do that shows human environment interaction. Location is where something is. Simply put, you ask yourself, where is it? Well, there it is. You can have absolute or relative location. I'm going to discuss those things in a moment. And then finally, your theme of place. Place is basically a fancy way of talking about the character. If I'm asking you to explain to me what Harry Potter is like, you could say, well, Harry Potter looks like a goofball. He's got his glasses. He's got the unruly hair. He's got the scar on his forehead. He's a nice guy. He cares for his friends. He's brave. He does what is morally correct, even if it is socially inappropriate or socially people are against him. These are some of the characteristics of Harry Potter. In the same way, place helps you to understand the characteristics of a specific location. Keep in mind, the difference between place and region is that with region, you are comparing 2 places based off of those characteristics. So, this brings us to passions for traditions. Very, very similar. They're designed to help you understand geography in a less broad sense, make it a little bit easier to understand. You've got this first tradition called the spatial tradition, where basically you were going to take elements of locations, so their characteristics, just like we would in place and region in the 5 themes, and we're going to understand the world better based on how we organize space. Area studies is the next of passions for traditions, and it's also very similar to the 5 themes of geography. Also called the regional studies tradition. The area studies, what you're looking at here is you're looking at a comparison from one place to another, just like you would if you're looking back at the region theme of geography. The man-land tradition is very similar to your human environment interactions, how we use the land around us to help us live our lives, to help us build cities or drive cars or whatever it might be that we're doing. And then finally, your earth science tradition has to do with understanding the planet. The one part that we're going to probably spend the least amount of time on in AP Human Geography. So nonetheless, still a major part of geography and a major part of really and truly knowing your planet and how we live on it. Globalization is one of the most important things we're going to talk about in the course for Human Geography. This is not something that's going away in the first unit. We're going to be reminded about how globalization has a grip on our planet in every single unit that we look at in AP Human Geography. And so what exactly is globalization? Well, it has to do with the interconnectedness of everyone on Earth. They are the forces that make us all basically one and the same. My boy Thomas Friedman writes a book called The World is Flat, in which he discusses how we have basically brought down and cut off all barriers to interaction across the Earth. If I want to order something from China and have it here in a week, I can probably do that, weirdly enough, if I was willing to pay for fast shipping. Or if I wanted to talk to someone in India today about my iPhone, I could call a call center and quite possibly talk to someone in another country clean across the Earth. And so globalization kind of takes two main forms that we're going to look at in this class. That is economic and cultural globalization. Keep in mind that when you think about economic globalization, do know, please, that globalization has not done anything to level the playing field. In fact, more people are there's probably a bigger income gap between the haves and the have-nots than there has been on a global level any time before now. But you can definitely argue that the poorest of the poor are in a better place today than they were even 50, 60 years ago because of modern day forces of globalization. So people have very mixed feelings about globalization from an economic standpoint because of these disparities. Another thing you're going to notice is that many of the powerful developed countries like Europe, the Americas, Japan, Australia, and a few others are going to be the ones who spearhead the world economy. They're going to be the ones who basically push it and gear it in the way that it's going. And so many countries, like some of your developing countries in Africa and South America and the Middle East and South Asia, are going to probably just do stuff that they can use to make money by selling their goods or services to developed countries. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that in some ways globalization keeps poor countries in their position of poorness because their position kind of helps to benefit some of your more developed countries. And so some people look at globalization as a form of cultural imperialism or a form of economic imperialism, and it causes, well, some people have mixed feelings about it. It causes some tension, it causes some conflict. Cultural globalization is very, very similar to economic globalization, and it's also kind of controlled by those that are the richest because, they're right, correct? I mean, no, I'm not really saying that it's right to be rich and not right to be anything else, but when you think about how people interact with the world around them and the kind of the things that they have in more developed countries, well, in countries where they speak English, they're more likely to have internet access. They're more likely to have educated individuals that maybe have a Western education, like doctors, engineers, and lawyers, and people like this that offer services that are going to help to stimulate your economy. And so many people are kind of afraid that globalization is going to end up being the end all of some of these smaller, more obscure, lesser known cultural groups that may not have a written tradition or may have endangered languages. And so you look at the battle here from a cultural standpoint between what will be gained by people that are, I guess, more poor by being like the West, and what will be lost when these civilizations, when these languages, when these cultures are completely eradicated due to the forces of cultural and globalization. And so once again, I mentioned in my video, AP Human Geography Video 3, that John Green did a very good job in one of his Crash Course World History lessons where he discusses globalization. I highly recommend you take a look at that if you haven't done it. Cultural globalization oftentimes is considered to be like almost a cultural imperialism or even Americanization. If you don't live your life like an American or like someone of the West, and you don't fit in right to the world in a modern sense, in a way that you have any kind of upward mobility. And so there's a lot of mixed feelings about globalization as a whole. The other side of this is your local diversity, all right? Localization, you might see it called. And so globalization is forces that make us all the same, more or less. What local diversity actually is would be kind of the opposite. It would be, what is it that we have that makes us unique? So take the United States as another example. You might have people that, everyone in the U.S. is going to be American. We're going to be bound together by feelings of Americanness and our faith in our Constitution and our, whatever else it might be. But on a local level, there's people who are Southern. There's people who are live in the northern Midwest. There's people that live on the West Coast. There's people live in different regions within the New England area of the United States. Probably one of the latest examples of local diversity in our country is the one over the rebel flag, where you've got many people in the South saying that the flag represents their heritage. In other words, their local identity as Southern Americans, or as people that had relatives that fought in the Civil War, whereas others say that it represents racism. We're not going to get into that right now, but just know that that is what I'm talking about. And that's what geographers are talking about when they say localization or local diversity. So whereas we live in a global community, we also have things, among all of our similarities that make us unique. And so you see where globalization and localization tend to conflict with each other all the time. And this is going to be one of the themes of the course of human geography. So when we look a little further and we start looking at geography in and of itself, I mentioned this above earlier, that there are two main branches of geography. There's the human geography that we're studying, and the physical geography. And so physical geography is exactly what it sounds. We're looking at the physical planet. We're looking at the study of the mountains, the regions, the different waters and valleys and archipelagos and all these different terms and things like this you're not going to see very much in human geography. Human geography, on the other hand, focuses on the interactions among human beings on Earth. So it looks at the spatial the spatial tradition. It looks at how we interact with the Earth around us and organize that Earth to meet our needs. And so these are some of the differences you're going to see in the discipline of geography as a whole, the human versus the physical. And truth is, you could probably teach human geography in over the course of maybe 3 or 4 different college classes. And there's so much in human geography that's unreal, just like there is in physical. So what we do is, at the AP level, we just teach you guys human geography because it teaches you about us. And it's really, really important that you know about us. Cartography is the study of maps, or the art and science of map making. And so a cartographer, like for example Mercator that we talked about, would be a map maker, someone who makes maps. Now today, it's important to know that maps are no longer really hand-drawn. They are made using computers and things like this. And so we're way more sophisticated in our capacity to make maps. But I want you guys to simply know right now what cartography is. In just a moment, we're going to discuss maps and other tools. Environmental determinism is a very important philosophy that we need to make sure we are familiar with. First of all, one of the most important things I'm going to say in this video is that no geographer today readily accepts the idea of environmental determinism. It was kind of like a social Darwinistic type mentality in the first place. Basically, what environmental determinists say is that the Earth is limited. People are limited on Earth by the environment around them. The environment essentially dominates their will and their abilities to do better or worse for themselves. And so by this mindset, Europeans basically would justify their greatness and their imperialism, for example, based out of the idea that if other countries had better environments that would help them to grow a little bit better, then they would have done the same thing. And so environmental determinism shows that some people are less than others based off of how they were able to develop due to their environment. Possibilism is the other side of this, and is actually far more readily accepted in the geographic community. And this means that people are able to adapt to their environment, which does have some degree of hold to them, but ultimately people are going to be able to adapt based on their own will, their own abilities, their own innovativeness in order to work around the obstacles that the environment may pose to them. And so possibilism has kind of replaced environmental determinism in the modern sense. The cultural landscape is as we discussed earlier when we looked at Carl Sauer, is the mentality or the notion that human beings have come and have put their imprint on the landscape. And so everywhere you look, you're never going to find a part of the earth that is completely devoid of all human activity. Even when you think about, like, for example, polar regions where we're never going to go, well, according to theories of global warming, we've already screwed all that up, or we've already changed even the landscapes where you would think that we haven't been or we haven't seen. And so in every conceivable way, people have in some way adjusted to affect the landscape. And we also do it in different ways. If you look in the United States, you're going to see, especially in the American South, you'll see a lot of churches, you'll see a lot of graveyards and cemeteries. If you go to the Middle East, you might see mosques or other types of buildings and things like this that are not seen readily in the United States. And so the way that we build stuff, the way that we organize our space, the way we put our houses, the way we put our homes, all of these things from place to place is going to look different, and it's a show of our cultural imprint on the landscape. And so to look a little further at this, you've got this idea of sequent occupants. And what that means is that over time, people have adjusted the landscape again and again. If you're looking at the old Roman Empire, you're going to see aqueducts, you're going to see the Colosseum, you're going to see all these things. You're also going to see elements of the Renaissance. You're going to see modern buildings and modern structures. All of it's going to be right beside one another, in the same general space. Well, this is sequent occupants, the sequence by which individuals come and leave their imprint on the land around them, and then they go and are replaced by others. And if you look at just the area, you can see parts of every single group of people and every single culture that's ever been part of that land. It's pretty cool when you think about it. The spatial analysis in geography is one of the most important things that you're going to learn about. And it's part of what makes geography, because what we're doing is we're understanding how space is being organized by studying, well, what we've done in those areas. And so human geography in particular is separated by the fact that we try to make sense out of space on Earth. That's what the word spatial means. We're talking about of space on Earth. And the way that we have organized that space to better meet our needs. And so that's what we need. That's what we mean. By the spatial analysis in geography. And just maybe one part of that would be the idea or the notion of space-time compression. And so basically, what this means is that over time, because of movement, because of our innovations in how we get around from one place to another, like the invention of cars, or trains, or planes, or boats, or the steam engine, going way back to the Industrial Revolution. What we've done is we've taken distance and we've compressed it because we can get there way faster. So it used to be that from Atlanta to Columbia would probably be this unbelievable trek, but now we have interstates and we have cars and stuff. It's about a 3.5-hour drive, and so we've greatly reduced the amount of time, and thus in our minds we've reduced the amount of space between Atlanta and Columbia. Okay, so if you guys are keeping count, we're about halfway there. So like I said, this is going to be a pretty long video, but you can pause me, you can rewind me, you can do anything you want to do, you can totally ignore me if you want to. I'm trying to teach you guys or help you guys get what you need to do well on my test. So let's keep on going. The oldest maps ever found, according to your textbook, we're going to say that these are some of the Babylonian maps that were, some of them are maybe 3,000 years old or so. I've also included a link here so you guys will be able to see that for yourself. But we're going to say those are some of the oldest maps ever found, but we don't really know if they're the oldest maps ever because, well, we don't have anything older that maybe still exists, but that doesn't mean that people didn't use them for a very long time. I mean, maps almost seem to make sense, as do giving directions or communication. One of the things that helped us human beings survive during the times we were nomads. Cartography, as I've already mentioned, is the study or science of making maps, but map projections, I told you we would come back to. So what exactly is a map projection? In the same way that my overhead projector, not my overhead, but my computer projector takes an image and puts it on my whiteboard, which is literally a white slab board that doesn't have anything on it, but it shows a representation of what's on my computer. In the same way, what people do when they create map projections is they take a part of a three-dimensional Earth, because the Earth is, face it, a sphere, it's 3 dimensions. They take it and they put it on a 2-dimensional surface, and this way it's easier for us to carry, to manage, to use productively and efficiently, and it serves us better than having a ginormous globe that shows us a scale we can understand. Problem with map projections is that there is no such thing as a map projection that does not contain a degree of distortion. What does distortion mean? Well, it means the map is lying to you. The map doesn't try to lie, it can't help it. For example, if you take Mercator's map, you can see that Greenland and Africa are like the same size on the map according to how the space looks, but in reality Greenland is probably about the size more like Libya, for example. It's not even close. It's like I want to say about a 15th of all of Africa is what Greenland is. In the same way, the United States, the state of Alaska looks bigger than the entire western half of the US. Basically, Russia and Europe and the United States looks huge on this map. It's just not real. And so maps show a great deal of distortion on any map that you're going to look at. Distortion can basically take three forms, and I'm going to type these up so you can see them. Map distortion is either going to screw up relative size, screw up distance, or screw up shape. Or sometimes it's going to screw up all of them at the exact same time, like the Robinson map does. The thing is, Robinson map looks pretty, doesn't it? And it doesn't screw everything up so bad that you can't get something out of the map. So keep in mind that distortion is there, but different map projections are intended for different types of use. Are intended to show you maybe one or two facets of geography, not the whole thing at once. And so it's important that you know what the map projection is attempting to do. Also, looking at maps, I want you to know what a mental or a cognitive map is. And basically, these are based on perceptions. I mean, if I asked you right now to draw a map from your house to your school, you could do that, and I could probably follow that map and get from your house to the school, and we'd all be well and good. But then if you looked on Google Maps, it's not going to look anything like what you just now drew on your paper, because in your head, you drew what you knew was there. But in reality, what you knew was there isn't actually what's there. It's based on what's in your head. Thus, it is a mental or a cognitive map. Cognitive means like having to do with thoughts or thinking. Thematic maps are another type of map we discussed in class, and these we looked in particular at cartograms, at choropleth maps, and at dot density maps. And what these maps try to do is they attempt to show you a characteristic of a region. And so if I'm asking you to understand how populations are laid out in the United States, you could use a choropleth map to show a if it's light blue, there's not many people living in that state. If it's dark blue, there's a ton of people living in that state. You could also use dot density maps to kind of narrow down where people are clustered in terms of population. Thematic maps can show you literally anything. I'm going to make sure that I include a link here to one of Hank Green's videos on the Blog Brothers, because he does a very good job at showing you all the different ways that thematic maps can be used to understand better the Earth around us. And then finally, there's also your reference map, the last type of map that we discussed in this unit. Basically, you use it to figure out where things are, so you're going to use it to understand location, either relative or absolute location. Now, in terms of map scale, we talked about several different things, or different ways to understand how distance is shown on a map. And so what you're looking at whenever you're looking at maps is you're looking at a part of the Earth. And so you want to understand relative distance if you want to get anything out of the map. And so the ways that you do this is you're going to look at either a ratio scale, a written scale, or a graphic scale. Now, most of the time, you're probably more familiar with a graphic scale. It might say that this line represents however many miles on the Earth's surface. And so you would take your little pencil like they show you in elementary school, and you measure it up on that line, and then you try to calculate the amount of distance between any 2 points on the map. The written scale is exactly what it sounds like. Someone just is going to take out the words and say 1 inch on this map equals 1,000 miles. Well, you just have your written scale. A ratio or fractional scale is, once again, as it sounds. So if you have a 1 to 24,000 scale, that means that 1 inch on your map represents 24,000 inches on Earth's surface. So the unit of measure is exactly the same. Sometimes you might see that written as a fraction as well. And so it's important that you guys also know, not only is it important to know the different types of scales, on a map, but you also need to know whether you are looking at a small or a large scale map. This can be very confusing, so don't get confused. The smaller the scale, the smaller the detail. Okay? Smaller the scale, smaller the detail. If you are looking at a world map, you are not looking at a lot of detail. So therefore, a map of the world as a whole is a small scale map. If you're looking at a map of a portion of Los Angeles, then you are looking at huge or large amounts of detail. And so large scale, large detail, a large scale map would be a map of a part of Los Angeles. So don't be confused by that. Make sure that you ask any questions if you're confused by small versus large scale. Another way that geographers are going to look at scale and that you need to be familiar with, other than map scale, is kind of the scale and scope of something, okay? So scale as a measure of impact, whether you are talking about on a local scale or on a global scale. So we're talking about like in terms of how big it is. All right, so the example that I gave in one of my instructional videos recently was the example of ISIS as a global scale event, or maybe Russia as a global scale. So what we're looking at is things that impact all of us, or things that we're going to look at on a global scale that has some type of meaning to us, even on a local level. And then another example, for at least for us in South Carolina, of a local scale type incident would be the Charleston massacre that just happened back in June or May or whenever it was, that was local to us, and so it affects us on a local and personal level. But also, that local event was known worldwide. People all over the place, just like we watch their news, and we know when people die in a bombing in a subway somewhere in Germany. They know when things like that happen, in our local communities in the United States. And so the important thing that I want you to know about scale in terms of global versus local is that global stuff impacts you at a local level, and local stuff can have an impact on things at a global level. And it's weird to think about it like that, but it's just the way it is, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, we're going to finish up our discussion on the tools by looking at geographic information systems, GPS, and remote sensing. Geographic information systems are those things that uses quantitative data or numbers of some sort to form layers of information that you combine onto a map. And so you're using geographic information systems to create a map using layers of information. That's the important thing. If you know that, you're going to do well on my test. Remote sensing, I'm going to skip GPS just for a second. What remote sensing is the way that we use different types of technologies. A lot of times you might see infrared technologies, or remote sensing might be used to determine weather patterns or climate or things like this by getting a bird's eye view, either using a satellite or something like a really high-flying airplane to take a snapshot of the Earth from way above. And so what it does is it gives us a different perspective to help us compare regions and understand characteristics of a location. GPS, to finish up on these tools, is used to understand where things are, absolute location. It used to be that it was used only for military purposes, like dropping bombs and stuff, but eventually we put it so that we can grab it on our phone and use Google Maps to get from one place to another. Pretty cool. Last section of things you need to know for this AP Human Geography Unit 1 review: general terms and concepts. Bam, let's do this. Let's finish it up. 32 through 42, let's go. Maybe there was 43. We'll figure it out together. Land Ordinance of 1785. The only thing I'm asking you guys to know about this for the sake of my test is that we use a system of townships and ranges, and essentially a grid system, to survey land in the Western Territories in the United States of America. And it basically changed the way that we organize our space. And so if you look at a map of the U.S., and you ever thought maybe it's a little bit weird that the eastern states, like eastern and southern states, like if you look at South Carolina, for example, between South Carolina and Georgia and North Carolina, all these different states there, you're going to see that the boundaries are kind of jaggedy and weird. They follow geographic boundaries, kind of like the Savannah River that comes between Georgia and South Carolina. And then later on, the states in the Midwest are so boxy and so plain looking. Well, that's because what they do is they change the way that they started to organize space in our country. And it started with this Land Ordinance of 1785 with the use of townships and ranges. Townships And ranges I talked a little bit more about in my instructional video. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just leave a link for townships and ranges for you guys to be able to find out a little bit more. But I would refer to the book for that. Ask me any comments or questions if you have them about this. But what I'm going to do is, for the sake of getting through this a little quicker, I want to skip that section there and let you guys figure it out on your own. Toponym is a place name. It's just a simple geographic terms you guys need to know. So if I'm living in Columbia, South Carolina, well, Columbia on a map would be a toponym, being the place name. Site and situation can be kind of confusing in human jargon. So I always have students that get mixed up or don't ever really fully understand exactly what I mean when I ask for site and situation. So basically, if you're looking at the 5 themes of geography, site is very, very similar to place, and situation is very, very similar to relative location. How similar are they? Well, basically, when we look at site, we're looking at the characteristics of a location. So if I explain to you the site of Atlanta, then I'm telling you it's very, very urbanized. There's tons of people. There's very busy roadways. You want to shoot yourself in the head because of how busy it is. Oh my gosh, these things describe the site of Atlanta. If I'm describing the site of the Grand Canyon, I'm describing its characteristics, the different rocks, the tourists or whatever, the void, everything, the nature looking stuff related with the canyon itself, the river going through it. All of these different things describe the characteristics of the location. So the reason why I've got polders and building islands and building cities as samples under site is because site can be changed by human beings to meet our needs. And I want you to know that some of the ways we discuss site being changed in class is by the Netherlands' use of polders, which is basically recovering land out of water. They basically make land, and so they get rid of some of the water and build on it and create land. Building islands in the South China Sea is something that you see China, especially, and maybe a few others doing right now, because they're trying to lay claim to the South China Sea. And I guess building islands and things like this today and adapting the site makes it a little bit more legitimate. Also, cities like New York and cities like Tokyo were largely built using landfills in order to basically expand the amount of land that you have for those cities. So these are all different ways, among others, that people use site or people change site to better meet their needs. Situation being relative location, basically. When you think about a situation on a map, what you're doing is you're using like an inset map to show maybe where something is on a grander scale. So if I show you guys a map of Hawaii, then I might off to the corner of my map have another smaller map that shows the world as a whole and then pinpoints where Hawaii is, so that you have an idea of Hawaii's situation on Earth. So that right there is how you might see site and situation, and they're very similar, as I said, to place and relative location within the 5 themes of geography. Still not done with the 5 themes. I wanted to revisit regions just for a second, because there are specifically 3 different types of regions that we talked about, and you need to be able to differentiate between them when you're ready to take this test. And so one of them we talked about was a vernacular region. Another word, by the way, for vernacular region is a perceptual region. So human geography students all over the world, you might need to know this term as either or both, because it's based on someone's perception. It's based on someone's how they view it in the head. It's not the same as a mental map. Let me give you an example. The American South is not actually a known formal region. All right, some people characterize it based on different concepts or different characteristics. For example, some say that the original states that seceded from the Union are the boundaries between of what the South actually is. Others say it's a place where you can get sweet tea, which X's Florida off the list. Maybe not. I went to Florida a long time ago and I couldn't find sweet tea where I was. So, but I've been told since that Floridians do drink sweet tea. So I'm probably way wrong on that. You also have low test scores or low education rates in general, high dropout rates. I'm not picking on the South, man. I love the South, but we also have some of the highest infant mortality rates in the developed world. So these are all statistics that could be used to label or understand or characterize the American South. You also could say the Bible Belt, for example. Most, large amounts of Protestant Christians, in particular Baptist Christians, make up what most people would define as the American South. So these are all different ways you can characterize the American South as a vernacular or perceptual region. A formal region is one that, again, is united by a set of common characteristics like any other region, but formal regions are you're either there or you're not. The Rocky Mountains, if you're in the mountains, you're there. If you're not, you're not. If you're in South Carolina, you're in South Carolina. If you're in North Carolina, you're in North Carolina. Okay? So there are some of the ways you look at formal regions, and they do have set boundaries, unlike your vernacular. A functional region, lastly, is the type of region that performs some kind of a service or function, like a radio station. If you're going far enough on the interstate, you're going to lose your reception eventually and have to switch to another radio station because you have left the functional region of radio station A. Now, finishing it up. Absolute location versus relative location. Absolute is going to be measured using latitude and longitude. Latitude and longitude are also called parallels and meridians. I should have written this the other way. So latitude lines and parallels are one and the same. Longitude lines and meridians are one and the same. And I haven't spoken a whole lot in class about latitude and longitude in and of themselves yet, and we're going to. But know that latitude lines never intersect at all. That's why they're called parallels. Longitude lines do intersect with other longitude lines, and they do this at the polar regions. And so the North and the South Pole, if you look at a globe, is where all of the longitude lines intersect. Longitude lines also intersect parallels at right angles. So don't be confused by different map projections that look like there is like an angle or something, because remember, the map is lying to you. If you look on a globe, longitude lines and latitude lines always intersect at right angles. Nothing more, nothing less. I want you to know what the equator is, obviously. I also want you to know the prime meridian is going to separate the Earth between the eastern and western hemispheres. Now, another way that we use absolute location is if you give someone an address, and it is actually kind of a form of absolute location, because if you're delivering the mail and you have an address in your hand, that's where the mail goes. There's never going to be another address that is exactly the same, because otherwise you're going to be confused as heck, right? Where in the world are you going to take the mail? Who gets it? I guess this guy gets the mail and this other guy doesn't. So addresses are also used as a measure of absolute location. Relative location, getting real close to the end here, is going to be used for giving and understanding directions. McDonald's is across the street from Walgreens, in the same shopping district as Bilo. So now I know where McDonald's is because you just told me where something bigger is in relation to McDonald's. And so now it's easy to find. Density represents or discusses or means basically how much of something goes on in a set region. Okay, so if you look at the population density in the United States of America, you're taking the amount of people that live in the country and dividing it by the amount of land area. But that's not really accurate for understanding where people live, because some people don't live in some whole areas of the U.S. For example, if you're in the central U.S., very few people live there compared to the eastern United States and the New England region, or even along the eastern coast, and also some along the western coast in California. And so we use concentration to better understand exactly where people live on Earth in general, both at a local scale and also at a global scale. Diffusion, looking at globalization, diffusion is kind of how ideas spread from one place to another. And there are two different types of diffusion. Listen very carefully to what I'm about to say about this. Two different types of diffusion: relocation and expansion. Okay? Now, relocation diffusion can only occur with the actual relocation of human beings that take that culture from one place to another. When we think about relocation, we think about things like that. For example, the Amish cultures come out of a Protestant migration from Europe to the Americas. And with the movement of those people come the diffusion of their culture. And then even today, they spread by expanding. So they might be leaving the Lancaster area in the Pennsylvania region of the United States, and they might be moving to other places where land is cheaper. But people aren't just becoming Amish. The only reason why the Amish culture is spreading is because people are moving there. And then the second type of diffusion is expansion diffusion. All right, now there are 3 different types of expansion diffusion. So this is the thing you need to listen to. 2 types of diffusion, but expansion diffusion has 3 types in and of itself. Expansion diffusion as a whole is discussing how ideas and things spread by basically on their own accord. So without the movement of people. How do things expand without the movement of people? And so contagious diffusion means that it might spread like a disease or a virus. If a video goes viral on YouTube, it is spreading by contagious diffusion. It doesn't care about how rich you are, or what ethnicity you are, or what sex you are, if you're a girl or boy. It's going to come to you equally and with equal force as it would to anyone. That's contagious diffusion. All right. Hierarchical diffusion is when something is diffused from important places or important people and goes into lesser important places and lesser important people. And I don't mean to say that some people are better than others. What I mean is that basically you have some people that are actors or high-level politicians or super rich, and because of this, they're very influential. You also have cities like New York City, which is one of the biggest cities in the world and is the largest city in the U.S. And so if something happens there, then that's why I'm saying that it's more important, quote, because I actually mean that it's so influential due to its massive size. And then finally, your stimulus diffusion is going to be an underlying concept being diffused from one failed effort to another one that ends up taking off and having success. In my video where I discussed this, AP Human Geography video 3, we talked about Apple computers and the Big Mac. Finally, a hearth, which I misspelled by putting a capital E there. A hearth is simply going to be a place of origin of something that is diffused. And so if we talk about the hearth of Christianity, for example, we're looking at Jerusalem or Israel with Jesus, and then the missionaries spreading it throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and all that. Okay? So there you go. If you know these things that I just covered in relatively good detail, but very, very fast, still a long video. If you know these things, you're going to do well on my test. If you're watching this and you're not taking my test, it's still going to be very, very helpful for you when it comes to preparing for your own Unit 1 test, or also maybe later on for the AP Human Geography exam. So don't forget about it. Subscribe. Share my videos. Let other people know what's going on, and see if we can't get as much help as possible when it comes to preparing for this class and for this exam. Let me know if there's anything I can do for you. Thank you.